All right, we are now joined by my good friend, coworker, host of the Locked On Big 12 podcast. You can follow him on Twitter at Josh Neighbors _. It is my friend Josh Neighbors. How you doing, brother?
I am well, Jeff. It's nice to come on. We're on your show in the audio version, and on
Yeah.
the video version, we're on my show, which is I kind of like that. Pretty cool.
It's like a home and home, right?
Yeah,
It's got a little bit of
exactly
both.
right. Exactly
Yeah.
right.
And it's a twofer. I just let's just try to make sure I'm not, Washington losing and having to pay $500,000 to you. You know what I mean? But look, I am excited. This is long overdue. I've been on your pod and I've
Mhm.
dragged my feet and have not had you on mine. So it's a pleasure to have you, man. And look, week one, it's in the books. We've
Not quite.
Well, that's true. That's true.
Not quite. We have one more to go.
At the time of taping right now, we
Yes.
do have Ole Miss taking on Louisville tonight. Who do you got in that, by the way? We'll see. The future us will probably
Ole
hate us
Miss.
for doing it. Ole Miss. You got Ole Miss?
I have Ole Miss. I also have the -8.5 too, so I have a lot of faith in them. Too.
I was just going to ask against the spread, even without Lane Kiffin.
Yep. Louisville's bad. It is more of a Louisville being bad thing. That's more about Ole Miss being good.
Yeah, year 2 of Scott Satterfield. It'll be interesting to see how that turns out. But for the most part, week 1 is in the books. And we'll get into analysis stuff and break down some of the games. And obviously week 1, we can't glean too much from what we've learned, but we can learn. We saw some things we can take away from. But as a fan, and I've been asking people around college football this, what was the highlight of the weekend for you as a fan? Having college football back with people in the stands, there were a ton of great moments, both on the field and off. So what was the thing that stood out to you after week 1?
Well, two angles as a fan. One, I am a Virginia Tech fan. So I worked 4 to 6 Eastern Standard Time on Friday. So right when the show ended that I was working, I hopped right off and I put the television on. My grandparents were actually in town. They were Virginia Tech season ticket holders for 45 years. So I was able to sit down with them and watch the game. Obviously, seeing Enter Sandman for the first time was a great experience. I know a lot of people were there. And then to go and watch Virginia Tech actually beat a top 10 team at home, something that, I can't remember them doing. That was a great moment as a fan. Then also just this Saturday, obviously with Locked On Big 12, but having games in all 3 windows, I had 2 TVs going and I was locked in. I had Kansas State and Stanford with Oklahoma on early. I had West Virginia and Maryland and then Texas and Louisiana in the middle of the day, checking in on the Iowa State UNI game. And then at night, Baylor, Texas State, and Houston, and then Texas Tech. So just being able to sit there and have something all day long on both screens was a really gratifying experience, I think.
Absolutely. It's, like our man Mark Packer says, right? Just got to get it all over you. Just fully immersed in college football. And I felt the same way. Honestly, so I've gone back and forth. I thought the game last night, the Florida State Notre Dame game, there was something about it was an incredible game. It was back and forth, basically for the first half, and then Notre Dame breaks out in the third quarter, and then we see this awesome 18-point comeback and Jordan Travis and the Mackenzie Milton story, which I thought, that storyline, it wasn't made as big of a deal as the Alex Smith thing, because obviously Mackenzie Milton doesn't quite have the same, name power that a quarterback who's been a starter in the NFL for the better part of 15 years would.
Right.
But I thought that storyline, him coming back, first game in 3 years, almost 3 years, and the tribute to Bobby Bowden at halftime, the band played Amazing Grace, which was chilling. But in terms of just those moments where you're like, fans are back, we're in it, I jump around, hit differently. And I would say Enter Sandman did too. Now, as a JMU alum, I also have fond memories of Lane Stadium. Just saying, haven't played since.
That's very true.
We talked about Montana FCS team knocking off a ranked opponent. JMU is on that list against Tech. An all-time moment, but it was great to have fans back. And I think everyone was getting ready leading up for the game, right? Top 5 matchup, week 1, Clemson, Georgia. It didn't live up to the hype in the way that traditionally we might think, but it was a really entertaining game in terms of 2 elite level defenses going head to head. My question for you, though, is involving just the top five, right? The big five we consider: Clemson, Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, Oklahoma. Of those those 5 games, I should say, I guess 4 games technically, which of those were the most eye-opening to you, positive and negative? If there's one that really blew you out of the water and said, wow, this team is legit, or one that maybe you're starting to kind of raise an eyebrow at?
Yeah, I just want to go back real quickly to the Notre Dame game. So, like, that game has everything about college football that makes it just this weird, amazing sport. You have the comeback, you have the Bobby Bowden, you have the game, the Mackenzie Milton comeback from the actual literal comeback in the game. Also, you have the just bizarre execution statement
Oh
after
my
the game,
God,
which
yes.
you and I, full disclosure, were working last night.
Mhm.
And we totally missed it because we had the audio feed from Florida State on. So
Yeah.
we missed this bizarre comment. So really that game had like all the weird things about college football that we love.
I just saw like trending on Twitter and people being like, "Oh no, Brian Kelly." And yeah, we were getting ready to go on air and I was like, "What is everyone freaking out about Brian
Right.
Kelly? We're trying to get audio together and get our, crap in a row." And
Yeah.
eventually, we kind of stumbled on it. So again, of those top
Yeah.
5 teams, which was the one, the biggest eye opener, positive or negative?
So I'll go Big 12 first. Oklahoma, Tom Luganbill said this the other day, they were reading the press clippings too much.
Mhm.
They got punched in the mouth by Tulane. Not once, not twice, but 3 times, I would say, in this game. They
Yeah.
went down, they threw the pick, they went and then allowed a score. They tied 7-7, and then Tulane came right back down and scored. They got a major lead. They really showed how good of a team they are in that back part of the first half. And then Tulane goes on this massive comeback. They only allowed 3 points second half. At halftime, Oklahoma had 37. They ended up the game with 40. Also, Tulane had the ball with a chance to win in Norman after they got displaced after a hurricane. Like, Oklahoma got that game at home and could not put a displaced Tulane team away. And I thought it was because they were undisciplined. Lincoln Riley even said as much afterwards. So on a negative end, look, I heard a lot of people saying, same old Oklahoma defense. I don't buy that at all. It's one game, and they clearly lacked focus.
Mhm.
This stuff builds. Let me see them when they play Kansas State in a month, because Kansas State looked pretty good against Stanford. But let me see them there. Let me see if they can build there. But I would say from a how'd you look standpoint, there's that. And then on the flip side, Alabama just drilling Miami. I
Yeah.
mean, they were so prepared, both sides of the ball. Now, Miami's not as tough of a test as Clemson is, so I want to give Georgia's defense their flowers. You will talk about prepared. That group threw the kitchen sink at
Mhm.
DJ Uyunglele, and he could not handle it. Their offensive line couldn't handle it. So I would say negative side, Oklahoma, positive side, Alabama, and a positive side too, especially the top performer of the weekend was Georgia's defense.
I thought Georgia's defensive line, because for the most part, they were rushing 4 and playing 2 deep
Mm-hmm.
safety basically the entire game.
Yep.
And they would send an occasional blitz, but and I think there was some expectation that that might happen when you have your head coach and Dabo Swinney saying we might have to rotate centers. We hear about rotations of wide receivers
Right.
and running backs and DNs. You don't talk about rotating offensive linemen, let alone your center,
Right.
who especially when you're talking about communication, when you have to double team guys. And it was a 4-on-5, and Georgia won single-handedly. It was like the Alabama basketball game a couple years ago when they literally had like 3 guys on the court, and they
Right.
still almost won the game. Like,
Right.
it was amazing that they just took their 4 guys and they said, "We're going to beat you here, and we're going to take away everything in your passing game." They couldn't run the ball. They couldn't do anything. And
Yeah.
to Clemson's credit, I thought Clemson was really, really good defensively.
Yeah.
We know Brett Venables is one of the best defensive coordinators. He's the highest paid defensive coordinator in football, at least in college football, probably the NFL too. I mean, he makes
Yeah. I
over
mean,
$2
let's be
million
honest.
a
Yeah.
year,
Yeah. Yeah.
so he's at least up there if he's
Right.
not. But that team came ready to play. I think the JT Daniels Heisman buzz has calmed. It's still going to be a long season, and until they have to play Alabama, if inevitably they end up playing Alabama in the SEC championship game, that's going to be the toughest offense that, or the toughest defense that they will go up against. That Clemson defense came to play,
Yeah,
and you got to give both sides credit. There was
right.
no offensive touchdowns. There's 2 field goals, and the pick six was the difference maker.
Well, it's what's interesting is a couple things. The you mentioned it with the center rotation, the inside pressure all day from guys like Jordan Davis. Everybody mentions it all the time. That's what ultimately disrupts a quarterback more than anything else because it knocks you off your line,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's no pocket if there's inside pressure. It literally splits the pocket into 2 pieces.
Yeah.
If we're talking about what a pocket looks like. And so their ability to generate inside pressure, they were running stunts and twists. And like you mentioned, 4 or 5 guys, it didn't take much. Georgia's defense, well known for keeping everything in front of them. That
Mm-hmm.
extra man, they didn't have to rush 6 guys. 5 was enough for them. And oftentimes 4 was enough. But if they wanted to get there quick, they'll send that 5th guy. And like you mentioned, Clemson's defense too. I always say that a bad offensive line kills everything. We've seen it for Florida State for the last 4 or 5 years now, right? A bad offensive line wrecks your entire game plan because your offense can't get going. You're constantly putting your offense in bad and long situations. It also puts your defense in a lot of bad situations because either the offense gets backed up and the defense on the field for a long time, or the offense makes mistakes, putting the defense in pretty bad spots. So I think with Clemson, with how Clemson's defense, you're totally on it. With how many bad spots their offense put them in, they played a phenomenal game. They really
Mm-hmm.
played a phenomenal game. Now, I think Georgia's got some serious limiting factors on offense. They were missing a lot of guys that they expected to have out there, but that's not an excuse, right? This year, we know everybody's been missing guys, whether it be COVID, injuries, or
Mm-hmm.
Gilbert's weird situation. But I think you're spot on with the way that game went down. And, we expected a kind of a classic, and a Big Ten football game broke out. That's kind of what we got. Or Steelers-Ravens, if you will, really broke out.
What's your take on that, by the way? Because there was a lot of people who were really upset that there was a lot of negative talk surrounding, the Penn State and Indiana, or Penn State and Wisconsin game, and people how bored everyone was. It was 0-0 at halftime,
Right.
Georgia and Clemson was almost 0-0 at halftime as well. The fact those 2 games mirrored each other eerily similarly, with the blocked field goal and then the missed field goal. Like
Right.
there was a lot of mirroring there. To me, I don't know. I'm an optimist when it comes to football. I was happy to have football back. I just was
Yes.
enjoying seeing defenses kind of going after it, seeing 2 elite defenses and then 2 really good defenses in the Big Ten. But do you buy into the narrative side that somehow we view the Big Ten differently because of the history of low
Yeah.
scoring, kind of grinded out types of games in the Big Ten?
I'm an anti-Big Ten guy, and this is why. So this is why they have the same problem in basketball too. Like think about basketball,
Yeah.
like Kofi Coburn and who was it?
Luka Garza.
Luka Garza. Who was the big kid Purdue had? Well, they have Travion Williams this past year. Caleb Swanigan, massive guy.
Yeah.
Remember that guy? Big. John Teskey, and then he can step out a little bit, and then the big kid. I forget his name for
Even
Michigan
like
this
Frank
year.
Kaminsky,
Right.
like
And so it's built
historically,
off
yeah.
of Wisconsin's slow pace. Like Wisconsin, Big Ten football, besides Ohio State, and besides, I think Penn State does deserve some credit. I think Penn State tries to be a bit more athletic with what they do, but and credit to Iowa because Iowa put their foot on Indiana's neck from the word go.
Mhm.
But I think the reason why I could say I enjoyed the Georgia game a bit more was because the level of athlete, the level of talent on that field is just a bit different. I know Penn State they really do threaten with the recruiting. They've done a really good job there.
Yeah.
But the level of player that Georgia had in the defense, the front line for Clemson on defense, it's just next level elite. And that's why, even though the game was complete crap in a certain way, there is a certain level of elite appreciation that we can have for a couple of those units on the field where, Graham Mertz shot. I mean, Penn State let Wisconsin have a chance to win that game multiple times. And Graham Mertz goes, no, I'm good, guys. You take it. Penn State can have that.
Yeah. And I would say too, I mean, there's a certain level of perception involved, but you're absolutely right. I mean, we're talking about 2 top 5 recruiting classes year in, year out for the last half decade at least, basically since Clemson and Dabo's been there. We're talking about just elite level guys, the guys they put into the NFL. Georgia, it's very well documented. And we're seeing guys who are going to be first round drafted talents. Not to say that there aren't a couple of those guys sprinkled in on Wisconsin or on Penn State. But we're talking about like legit 5-star dudes. So
Yeah.
it is a great point. And I would also say there's an excitement when you know that DJ Uiagalelei can throw a bomb for a touchdown anytime. Same thing with JT Daniels. We're talking about 2 guys who are number 1 recruiters, number 1 recruits in their classes respectively, just despite being a couple years apart. And so that threat of there could be a bomb, there could be a touchdown at any given moment kind of keeps you invested as opposed to watching Graham Mertz and Sean Clifford, who both of which, like pointed out, had
Yeah.
disappointing days to kind of say the least. Though that one Jahan Dotson touchdown was
Yeah, it was sick. That was sick. But no, you're spot on with that. And look, like JT Daniels goes 22 for 30 for 135. It's 4.5 yards per completion. DJ Uiagalelei 19 for 37, 178, 4.8 yards per completion. I mean, these guys are, like you said, top line guys, and to shut them out, it does take a high level effort. Like, I don't think those guys shot themselves in the foot that much. I do think it was the defense inducing those mistakes that we saw them make.
Yeah, no question. Let's move over to your neck of the woods, Big 12. Obviously, that's where you cover. So we talked a little bit Oklahoma. Right over the shoulder there. Oklahoma definitely had a disappointing showing, despite holding on to win. I think most OU fans would be upset. A lot of people thought they got outplayed. I think that's honestly a pretty fair, analysis of the game.
Fair
I do think
yes.
they got outplayed. Meanwhile, the other Big 12 team, at least temporary Big 12 team in Texas, had a fantastic showing, covered the 9 points, beat a good Louisiana program. When you look at those 2 teams, and those 2 games in particular, which do you think is more indicative of how the rest of the season will go? Do you think Texas is as good as they showed, or do you think Oklahoma may not live up to the hype that perhaps we were anticipating?
I'm going to go with the game I was more wrong about. That'd be a Texas game. So I actually thought Louisiana was going to come in and win. I thought a lot of the comments that Steve Sarkisian was making leading up to this game were telling that he did not feel good about his quarterback situation, and that Hudson Card had kind of backed into the job as opposed to winning it outright. And for a lot of my watchers on YouTube, this is the game that actually got the most flack about. A lot of Texas people told me I was wrong. I should trust Sark. And those people, I'll tell you, you were right. All of you guys were right. Hudson Card managed this game perfectly. It's hard to appreciate how good Bijan Robinson is until you watch. And he's just better than most guys. He's better than the best player on the field. He was the best player on that field on Saturday. And they found effective ways to get him the ball in space. I thought they found effective ways to get all the guys the ball in space. Roshan Johnson, Bijan Robinson, Jordan Whittington. I thought they did a great job getting those guys into space. I thought Casey Thompson's appearance was well managed. I like Steve Sarkisian as a coach. I actually think he's going to do well at Texas. I just thought to see a well-organized result like this, the way that we saw it was a well-oiled machine, very, not want to say Alabama-ish, but in terms of like getting the job done with a bunch of kind of new pieces on offense, or kind of new meshing, new coach, whatever it is whatever you want to say on offense. I thought that was impressive to have a new coach, new quarterback, and to have them look as smooth as possible, to have a running back who was underused and get him the correct amount of touches, get him to the right places, and get things accomplished and done like they did. A++. I think that is a performance that's indicative of what Texas can be. The question is, can you consistently deliver that performance? And maybe Arkansas gives us an idea on Saturday night.
Yeah,
but we'll see. But I think against that kind of competition, coming in to deliver that was impressive to me.
I was blown away, and I tend to agree with you because I think Oklahoma came out flat, and I think they have dudes. I think given kind of everything that went on, and I think Tulane was coming out with something a little bit special. Everything that happened with the hurricane, being displaced, and then to inevitably show up, like it was just one of those things where it's so cliche, and I know a lot of former athletes hate when you say this, but I think they just kind of wanted it more. Like, yes,
They
both,
did want it. Oh, they definitely wanted it more.
yeah,
They
like
definitely wanted that game more.
because it's like a dumb thing to say. It's like obviously both sides want it. Both
Right.
sides want to win the game. But I do think sometimes there's one side, and maybe wanting it more is just our colloquialism as a way to kind of, convey the same idea, and we don't really have a word for it. But there was just a certain amount of energy that they brought that Oklahoma just didn't. And so I think Oklahoma's going to be fine. I think Lincoln Riley's going to rip into them this week, and I think they're going to come out rolling here next week. And they have a much easier matchup here in week
Right.
2 as well. And because Tulane, look, I mean, Tulane was in a conference championship, within the last 2 years. Like that, we're not talking about some no-name startup program.
And they're like Bill
Mhm.
Clark is a really good coach.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I thought they did a great job. And I think Oklahoma, again, they knew everything that was coming. Like that was a really telling quote that I don't know if I think it was Lincoln Riley, it might have been Alex Grinch, but one of them had said, we weren't surprised by anything that they did. And that is concerning. When you knew, like, when they didn't throw any wrinkles at you, you just got outplayed. That the talent that's on OU's defense is there, and I think the defense will end up being better. But to go to Texas for a second, I think I was high on Texas in this game. I called it a must-win because not just for their season, but to put a stamp on this. Tom Herman came out flat in his. Charlie Strong came out flat in his first game at Texas. And Texas is, in my opinion, I think the hardest job in America because of everything you have to deal with away from football. During Big 12 media days, a lot of Steve Sarkisian's comments about, being, his experience as a head coach. Like that's never been a question, right? Like his time at
Right.
Washington, his time at USC. Steve Sarkisian, the football coach, is a good football coach, and we know that. My biggest question, what we never really saw, was Steve Sarkisian, the person, was kind of what was holding them back. And when he came out in media days and said, I used to make it about me. When we won, it was because of me. When we lost, it was other things. And he got humbled based off of everything that happened in his personal life, going to the NFL, working with, the Falcons for a couple of years, and then going to the Nick Saban School of Rehabilitated
Right.
Coaches. And now he's got an opportunity to be the more improved version of himself while still being the elite football coach that he is. And Carson Hurd, man, like I was blown
Hudson
away.
Card.
Sorry,
Hudson Card.
I switched the names.
Yes. Don't worry. Our friend Chris Play called him Kate Hudson last week. So you're totally fine.
I do that all the time where I'll just flip the first. It's like
Hudson Card's not
dyslexia.
a normal name either. Not a normal name, Hudson Card.
No. Hudson Card, he looked phenomenal. How comfortable he was throughout every stage of it. And I think that is a Steve Sarkisian thing. We saw what he did with Mac Jones. And I think a lot of what we saw to Bryce Young on Saturday also directly ties into the job that Steve Sarkisian did with him last year. We saw him get the most out of guys like Jalen Hurts and Tua. And now all three guys are going to be starting quarterbacks. And I think we're going to see the same thing at Texas. And the way that they were able to get the ball into Bijan Robinson's hand in space to make plays, as you alluded to, I mean, that touchdown catch, I mean, he's the best player on the field, and there was no one within 15 yards of him, and he walked into the end zone. So I'm with you. I think Texas is really good, and this leads me to the team that I think most people were excited about in the Big 12 was Iowa State, who got by the skin of their teeth to Northern Iowa on Saturday. Are we starting to get worried, especially after what we saw out of Texas? Has your confidence level wavered at all? Obviously, we're going to learn a lot this weekend when they take on Iowa, but has your confidence level wavered at all after week 1 with Iowa State?
They're notoriously slow starters. Like that is, if there is a knock against Iowa State, is the fact that they really do tend to start slow some seasons. And this was 110% a slow start, in my opinion. They end up getting the job done, and I'm not going to lose. I'm not going to lose a ton of faith. I'm not. I just think that they got a lot of the jitters out of this week. I think this is what that was. This is a team with so much expectation, and maybe there's more of those jitters this week. But they've answered a lot of times when big questions are asked of them, they do answer. They beat Oklahoma last season. They almost beat them a second time. They ended up beat Oregon. They beat Oregon in the championship game. They throttled West Virginia down the stretch last year. And West Virginia, where people started to say, "Oh, could this be a pretty good team?" They have a good way of answering questions. So the performance was not good. My concern level is not high. My concern level for this week is really just the fact that Iowa might be a really good football team, but Iowa
Yeah.
kind of looks like. Here's the thing: Spencer Petras does not scare me that much. So I think if Iowa State can get up in this game this coming week, they're going to be fine. But they got to get to that point. They got to get up in this game and put pressure on Iowa to come from behind. And for that, they can't be slow starters in the game. They can't be slow starters this season because this is a team that's got some lofty goals. And like what's the finished product going to be? We don't know yet. We really don't know. And the same can be said for Oklahoma. So it's about time for Iowa State. I know it's early on, but they got to start kicking themselves in the rear end and start getting things going.
Yeah. I love your point there about if Iowa State can get ahead, I think they're going to be in a good spot in that game because I'm with you 100% there. I think if Iowa State gets a lead, they will be able to run the ball with Breece Hall and at least try to control the game. I think Iowa, as good as they looked, I think it's a little bit of smoke and mirrors. I do think they're a really good football team. But from the second half on, 2 of their touchdowns were from pick sixes. And from the second half on, they were pretty mediocre on offense. Yes, they scored a couple touchdowns, but they had opportunities to blow out Indiana by more than they even did. And their defense was really, really good. And I think Michael Penix, he looked really bad. He looked
He's coming off a major injury too, so it's like
100%.
how much can we really read into that performance? But yeah, I'm kind of with you on that. I think this game is super fascinating.
I do too. And I think it's going to be why I like it for Iowa State is as a team that does start slow, it's going to be a defensive battle. And I think both defenses are both teams are going to try to run the ball. They're going to try to score early. And I think whoever gets that lead first will probably end up holding on to it because especially if it's like a multi-score game, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough to score points against enough points to get back into it. So I think whatever team plays better on defense is ultimately going to do it. But looking at Iowa State, this is kind of a perfect matchup in terms of if you're going to have a top 25 matchup as a slow starting team, this is going to be kind of like a pick 'em. And they get the home field advantage. Iowa's got to come to them, even though it's still in state. I think the atmosphere in Ames is going to make a big difference here. It's early into the week, but do you have a lean? Which way do you think this game will go?
I am leaning Iowa State, and I really am leaning that direction because I think Matt Campbell has to take a look at this game and say, look, they expect us to come out and try to, we're both teams are going to try to run the football. Like, don't just be that team. Teams are going to try to take away Breece Hall from the get-go. That's what teams are going to do. They're going to zero in on that part of the team. But this is an offense that's got so many weapons they can use, whether it's Breece Hall out of the backfield. They just try to get him in space a bit more, but Xavier Hutchinson, Tariq Milton, Charlie Kolar, even Chase Allen. They've got so many guys that are able players that right now I am leaning towards Iowa State. They're 4-point favorites. And I think the fact that I think they're going to punch first early. And if they can get that 7-0 lead, that 10-0 lead, I'll take my chances against Spencer Petras. I really will. So I'm leaning towards Iowa State right now.
I actually agree with you, but my biggest concern with that, and this is kind of, I guess, the next thing I want to ask you about. Brock Purdy last year was very underwhelming with the expectations going into it. And the big separator should be at the quarterback position between these two teams, because I think for the most part, they're pretty evenly matched. I do think Iowa State has better guys. I do think Breece Hall is going to be the best player on the field. But if you're going position by position, the biggest disadvantage gap should be between Brock Purdy and Petras. And after what we saw last year and what we saw in the Northern Iowa game, I'm not sure I see that. I'm not sure we've seen the Brock Purdy of 2 years ago. Yeah. And that they need that if they're going to be a national contending team like everyone wants them to be.
He's just got to be consistent. It's really right. That's what it comes down to. It's like he's so inconsistent. I mean, he was horrible in the first half against Baylor last year, lights out in the second half. Great against West Virginia, awesome against Oklahoma in the second half of that game, and then bad in the very end. Like, I'm with you. He's going to put it all together. And as an NFL prospect, I'm not very high on him. But as a college quarterback, the guy can be an upper level college quarterback. It's just like the whole quarter by quarter, down by down basis thing that really kind of gets him sometimes.
He should be. He's got the talent to. He's got the offensive line, and he's got weapons. You know, the wide receiver room at Iowa State is not great, but it's
No,
good.
good.
You
It's
know,
good enough. Yeah,
you have Charlie Kolar, who's one of the best tight ends in football, and you have one of the best running backs in football, and a great offensive line. There shouldn't the excuses are starting to wear thin when it comes to why haven't we seen the Brock Purdy that we expect. And look, they're kids, right? Like you always have to keep them in the back of your mind, right? We're talking about college level kids. Like it's so easy. One little thing, guy's girlfriend breaks up with him, right? Like
right.
One little thing can completely throw these guys off. But it's been a long time since we've seen the Brock Purdy that we talked about as a top quarterback in college football last year. He wasn't that. And he had moments, right? But they need him to be that Brock Purdy this weekend. They need him to at least be above average. If they get the Brock Purdy from last week, I don't know if they get out of this game. I really don't, because that's supposed to, and Pete just played well, but I mean, he's got to win that. He's got to be the better of the two. But I am with you. I am leaning slightly towards Iowa State. I just like the roster a little bit better. But look, Kirk Ferentz he's been at Iowa for a long time.
Forever.
He's been there for a long time for a reason, because the guy knows how to win football games. And they're in that class of Kyle Whittingham and Utah and some of these teams where they'll be really, really good for a year, and then they kind of reload and build up. And this should be one of those, really built up rosters that Iowa has. Couple last things here before we wrap up. The game of the weekend to me was the one we had last night, Florida State and Notre Dame. Everything in it, like we talked about at the beginning, the pageantry of it all. Tallahassee was on fire. The theatrics, the missed field goal at home, the icing his own kicker, which it's hard for anybody to criticize Mike Norvell for doing that, because it went from a 51-yard field goal to a 37-yard field goal.
Yeah, it was. They were on you and I talking about it, the 21-yard line.
Yeah. Like there should be no revisionist history of, oh, why'd you call the timeout there? That was the logical thing to do. And kudos to the Florida State kicker for drilling the 51-yarder.
Yeah.
It's just a shame he ends up kind of hooking the second one there, and Notre Dame goes on to win. About these two teams, Florida State to me, and I've been high on this since they hired him, because one of my best friends is a Florida State fan, die hard. And he was pretty emotionally scarred from the Willie Taggart era, to say the least. And he said, man, I just don't know if I believe in this team. I don't know if I believe in the future of this. Mike Norvell gets hired, and he was skeptical. And I said, I think he got the guy. And it started off, there was almost a mutiny last year on that Florida State team. And what we saw was a really, really impressive outcome in year two. But last year, it's, there's an asterisk. So we'll say, year 1.5, basically, for them. Question simply, is Mike Norvell the guy, in your opinion?
I think the question is this: can he build an offensive line? Because Florida, I mentioned it earlier, Florida State's issue is at quarterback. Think about all the number of talented guys who have walked through that door in the last 5 years. And the fact they have not been able to figure out which one is good enough to play quarterback, it might not be the quarterbacks who are the issue, because it's hard to figure out how good a quarterback is if he's on his back the entire time. And you even saw it some last night. Like I thought their run blocking, was really good, but they had to move the pocket a lot last night. And that's something that you have to do when your offensive line's not very good. You got to get them moving out, moving in a couple directions, put an extra tight end there to block. And a nice shallow pass play that they ran. But like that's stuff they have to do. They have to get to a spot though where they can pass block. They need to be able to pass block so they can figure out who the best quarterback is. I think Mackenzie Milton should be the best quarterback they have right now, but I like Mike Norvell. I want to say he's the right guy, but you could even make the argument Scott Satterfield, was the right guy, and then he went 8-5 and sucked the next year, and now we're kind of in a weird spot. Yeah. So I think he is. It's just Can he build the offensive line again? And they looked a lot better last night, but that's just one game. So step in the right direction. Can they do it consistently? Because that's a team. So they beat UNC last year, right? Parts of last night they were on fire. Parts of last night they were crap. They got to figure out what's the in between.
It's tough too because it's interesting that you said you would lean more towards Mackenzie Milton, and I think Mackenzie Milton is the better quarterback. But for this team, I think it might have to be Jordan Travis because of the mobility, right? The offense, the interceptions, the turnovers, like that is the downside of having Jordan Travis in there because he's not as good of a quarterback. And despite him being there now for I think this is his 4th season at Florida State, he hasn't developed when it comes to the decision-making aspects of playing quarterback, but his athleticism opens them up in a way, not only in the running game, but in the passing game as well. Because look, everyone's covered. All right, I'm going to take it. Mackenzie Milton, we saw a couple of times, took some bad sacks down the stretch that almost really hurt them. I mean, again, if that pass that we talked about that set up the icing of the field goal in overtime, if that stays ruled a fumble, that's something that probably doesn't happen under Jordan Travis because he kind of scrambles around and gets space. But it's kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't, because you have to live with the turnovers with Jordan Travis. So I think Norvell's the guy, but you're right. And the other thing, too, is not only investing in the offensive line, and they've started to do this, but it's investing in the program. It's investing in the facilities. One of the interesting things I heard a lot about, and Andrea Adelson talked about this, was the way Bobby Bowden ran Florida State was running it like a mom and pop shop. They didn't invest millions and millions of dollars into facilities. He didn't take massive raises. He did everything through his fundamentals, the 3 Fs, right? Faith, family, football. Mm-hmm. And in modern college football, that just doesn't work. You need things to sell to kids that aren't just come play for Bobby Bowden or Jimbo Fisher. You need to invest. And that was part of the reason why Jimbo decided to leave us, in addition to $75 million to go to Texas A&M. So if they invest in the offensive line, obviously from a recruiting standpoint, but if they continue to build up the facilities, the program as a whole, I think they're on the right track. And I think Norvell, young guy, he's going to be there for what seems to be the long haul. As long as they, if this year, they're at 8 wins, if they finish 8-4.
Oh, they're 8 wins. They're huge so season. Happy. Yeah.
That's a huge season. And the fact that they almost beat Notre Dame last night, and there's an argument to be made, probably should have, or at least gone to double overtime, is very indicative of that. Last thing I want to hit with you here, and I know you're sick of talking about it, and everyone else in college football is sick of talking about it, and we don't have to break down the OU in Texas or any of that side of it. But there was a report, there was a meeting that went on today, Monday the 6th, of the presidents from all of the Big 12 schools discussing what the applications will look like for BYU, Houston, UCF, and Cincinnati. Is this the right call for the Big 12? I know they're in scramble mode. I know they're going to want a next TV contract, and getting the new states involved is going to help with that. But are those the 4 right teams? And is this way going about it, trying to replace with 4, is that going to be enough?
I might have switched UCF with Memphis or SMU. I think this is the right move. I think from a basketball standpoint, even without Texas and Oklahoma, this is one of the best basketball conferences in the country. You've got pillar programs such as Baylor, West Virginia, and obviously Kansas is your true anchor in that sense. Cincinnati's a really good basketball program. BYU obviously has a history. UCF's more on the up and come up, and Houston was in the Final Four last year. So, they fit in that sense. For football, I think all of those teams, look, Kansas is in the Big 12, so I can pretty much guarantee you that all of those teams won't finish last in football, although I do like Lance Leipold a lot. This is the right move. This is the move to make now. When all the other conferences said we're not expanding, everything else happening right now, I think this is the right move. It strengthens these other schools. It strengthens their position, and that's a fun conference, man. UCF, Cincinnati, Oklahoma State, these are all BYU. These are all really solid football programs. You think about Houston's they got a lot of issues. They got some stuff to sort out. But
they have Dana Holgorsen, who has experience in the Big 12.
Yes,
which I think is huge.
If they end up keeping Dana Holgorsen, yes, Yes, I totally agree. But yes, it's the right move. It's the right time, considering all the factors around them. This was a move they had to make with like what you mentioned, another upcoming TV contract. They had to make this move right now.
Yeah, I'm with you. The other interesting Houston wrinkle too is from 10 years ago. When they wanted to get into the Big 12 and were essentially blackballed from gaining access to it. And it went to like the court system and to like the state court of the state of
Yeah,
Texas.
Tillman
Like,
Fertitta and Bob Bowlesby are not on each other's Christmas card list. That is for
no,
sure.
but it is interesting to see them kind of, being okay, maybe, settling, realizing that there might be bigger fish to fry. And it's also telling. Maybe that James Harden deal to the Sixers, even after Daryl Morey left, maybe that was actually on the table. Maybe that actually was going to happen. There wasn't as much animosity between Fertitta and Daryl Morey as we all thought. Look, man, I really appreciate your time.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, long overdue. For the Read Option listeners, at Josh Neighbors _ host of the Locked On Big 12 podcast, does a phenomenal job. Good buddy of mine. And I appreciate you coming on. And to all the Locked On Big 12 YouTube viewers, hello. Thanks for letting me come on and crash host this for you guys. This has been a lot of fun. So thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Yes, man. Of course. It's always a pleasure speaking to you. We'll do it again soon.
Absolutely, man.